Good evening, my friends. I had another wonderful request to make a video practically how to train on Calm. And this is the how-to. So there's two different ways you could be doing this. There's essentially two different ways you could be doing this. One is you have a set schedule that's like, this is the minimum amount I have to do in a day and there's no other option. And part of this kind of depends on where you're starting at, because that could just be like getting out of bed and getting yourself meals and like going through a day. It could be I have a full-time job that I work and I can't not work because I have to support myself, or anything in between those two. But you may be given a baseline of load from life, and you need to work your brain up to that point because there's no option to do less. The other option is you get to decide, you have the flexibility to decide like what's your minimum, what you want to do in a day, and figure like you have flexibility in that. So in the one situation, you're going to be getting your brain up to the baseline of your load, like what's given that you can't control. And it may take some time to get there. You want to basically be training yourself to get to that point, to be able to be calm and grounded throughout your basics. That's going to be your baseline. And then you can start incrementally training after that. The other one would be you start where you're comfortable and where things are relatively easy, and then you do more incremental training up from there. But with either of these things, so the goal is essentially to teach your brain incrementally how to be calm and in the present moment, and to perceive reality as it's actually happening, instead of having the limbic system be projecting trauma and fear and loops onto everything and everyone and every event that's happening in your life. The point is, so training your brain to be calm is really just training your brain to be present and interpreting reality accurately as it's actually happening, and not with these ideas, these limbic ideas, kind of casting their shadows on everything. Octopus inking things, as I like to say, kind of like coloring things in ways that aren't accurate and are usually fear-based. So that's the goal, is to train your brain to operate that way. The incremental part is really just the fact that it's impossible if you've had very scattered brain function with a lot of fear and a lot of ruminating and a lot of pops and a lot of like obsessing about things and all kinds of those patterns and being stuck in activity all the time. It's not possible to go from that to perfect calm overnight. Like you can't. So the incremental is really just that it's going to take time to train your brain how to operate in that different way. And that's it. That's the incremental part of training on calm incrementally. So that will happen by itself. So really all that means is don't expect yourself to do this perfectly from the get-go. It's a practice, and you will get stronger and better at it over time. Now there's three different, the main point, there's kind of three different tactics that work pretty well, approaches that work well for this, depending on which trauma response is most active in you at any given point in your recovery. But the main goal is, again, you're basically working on POPs, because it's, again, all limbic activation is limbic activation, whether it's POPs or ITS, but the awareness of ITS and the ITS themselves are just a way to create adrenaline, and POPs are the same thing. So focusing on ITS is just a POP. The ITS being present is just a way to get adrenaline. POPs are the same thing. They're just patterns that are there designed to keep that stress chemistry pumping. It's all the same thing. So the goal of training on calm is really just to be continuing to redirect your attention away from all the patterns that have you stuck in a trauma loop, back to some sort of positive focus in the present moment, focusing on something that helps you feel calm in that moment. And sometimes with this, your focus and your engagement with a mood elevator is the calm. Like, there's no baseline, that's, you're training on calm because you don't have a baseline. So when you fully engage all of your brain, including your limbic system, and I often think of it as like your limbic system is like this eye, and it kind of can start looking at these patterns in your brain instead of what's happening, and then you have like the split thing where you have loops running in the background while you're trying to do something else. You want to get all of your brain, including your limbic system, focused on something positive. It really doesn't matter what it is. It could be anything from a ray of light to a Disney movie to a song to what it is that you're doing, to stating gratitudes out loud, or having a conversation with someone and really putting yourself into the conversation, anything at all. It really doesn't matter what it is, but something positive and constructive, and it's your focus, engaging yourself with that state of focus and engagement creates calm in that moment. Or at least, and it may, again, there may still be activation, there may still be the brain there may still be some sensations or some adrenaline or some anxiety in the background, but as long as you're fully engaged with that and there is some sense of calm from that engagement, and your limbic system's engaged, so you're not looping, there may feel like there's like a purple cloud or like some kind of like in the background, but that's very different than when it's taken over you and you're spiraling and stuck in a loop. So keeping yourself focused on that throughout the day as much as you possibly can, that's what that focus and that engagement with something as it truly is. And that's the whole point is, again, that little eye of your limbic system and what it's looking at, having that part of your brain along with the rest of the parts engaged is what teaches your brain, I'm training you to focus on, like, I'm training you to engage with reality as it is. So there's this very present, no expectations, open kind of focus on what you're focused on, and there's nothing else happening. And when you get that kind of focus, your limbic system, you're making it, because you're the one you're in charge. So you can make your limbic system, you can guide it and take it. You control where that eye looks, ultimately. It can be a slippery bugger sometimes, but you control it ultimately. You decide what it focuses on. So as you practice that focused, engaged way of interacting with your life, your limbic system is trained to be in a calm state, and because the neurological habit and the operating system becomes one of being fully engaged with what's actually in front of you all the time. And that's healthy brain function, and that's a calm brain. So that's the bottom line for that. And then there are a couple different places you can be coming from with this. So if you're coming out of like a fight or flight state with a lot of CAN chemistry, where you're almost more like the hyperactive side, a lot of movement can be helpful. There was a decent portion of my recovery where I walked between I walked probably an average of 6 miles a day, because I would just go out for long walks a couple times a day, 2-3 times a day. I'd go for a walk and just meander around the trails and in nature, because it was really soothing for me. And some days I clocked up to 9 miles, because I was just like that. It worked. It calmed my brain down, because movement can really help get the adrenaline out of your system. And where staying busy and doing tasks or walking or just keeping myself busy, moving, was really helpful to keep the adrenaline, to give it something to do, kind of to burn off that adrenaline energy, so to speak. So that may be helpful depending on where you're at. If you are coming out, if you're coming out of freeze response, keeping yourself in a gentle movement state most of the day is helpful. More just like keeping yourself busy and engaged with something, like puttering around. Kind of like keeping some part of your body moving, or keeping yourself doing some task where you're moving, where you're not just sitting still, because a lot of times the freeze will kick in when you just completely stop moving. The limbic system's like, okay, freeze time, let's throw this net over you, so you go into freeze. So just keep yourself moving, keep yourself busy, engaged, even as a foot tapping or knitting or crocheting, just keeping your hands, keeping your body busy, keeping yourself engaged in something. So there's a slow, steady movement that's not requiring exertion, but it's keeping a small amount of movement going so that freeze doesn't set in. There's another stage that is one of the ones I think most of us find the most difficult, who've had a limbic injury and live in this culture where busyness is glorified, of a time when you are coming out of, especially actually either freeze or fight or flight, or fight or flight and freeze layered over each other, because that can happen too. But when you're really starting to come out of it, a lot of times, especially when you're coming out of fight or flight, because when you're in fight or flight, it's like your body has the gas pedal pushed down for such a long time that your system is just exhausted. Even if you haven't been doing much, you've been on full throttle, being chased by a tiger probably for years or months or just a while, possibly decades. And your body's like, oh, I'm so exhausted. Can I just please do nothing? I'm so tired. And so for me, and this was distinct points very late in my recovery, I wanted to do nothing but eat or sleep for weeks. And it was, or just late, just not move. After all the activity and all, I spent months and years walking and busy and doing things and elevating my mood and everything. And then eventually, once the can stopped coming out like a fire hose, my whole body was like, just please don't make me move, please, I'm so tired, I just want to rest. So there's another phase where you may find like a lot of meditation and rest and just sleeping a lot, eating more, just being very cocooned in a restful state where there's plenty of life-givingness, food, sleep, rest, that sort of thing. And that's a very important restorative, like rebuilding type phase. A lot of my hormones regulated when I allowed myself to do that. And that is a really, like, that's a lot of times when the calm really starts to click, is when you let yourself do that. So that, and I don't know, for me, freeze has been like, it's something that happened kind of on and off in small portions. It wasn't like the main thing I was stuck in. But I found, even with that I still needed rest after coming out of freeze. So that kind of depends on the person, but just know that those are three different kind of ways it can look when you're training on calm, is either very active, moderately active but consistently, or deep rest. And all of those are appropriate at different points. So just give your body, do what works. And that's the bottom line with all of this, is do what works, and know that, again, you're training your brain how to process all the information that's coming into it in every moment in a whole different way. And that's where the incremental training, that's where the incremental part comes in. So just be patient and persistent with yourself. And then once you get to that point where you have a strong baseline of calm and you've gone through like the deep rest, and you're feeling like, okay, whatever that baseline is, whether it was given to you by the world and your job, or whether you got to pick it, once that feels well, and this is the way I always think of it, is that, like, as you're building that baseline of calm, it's like the amount of resources you have is increasing, like the amount of water in a river, and it's now higher than the amount of water, the amount of resources your body has is more than what your day is asking of you. And once you reach that point, that's when you can start to incrementally train on things like the typical way that's laid out, at least in DNRS. I don't know if Gupta or other programs have the same thing, but I know in DNRS, it's more like you pick something to train on. So at that point, that's when you'd start adding in, like a walk or a food training, or sense, more typical type things. So, and that's, I mean, at that point, you want to take it slowly still, but the main thing is you want the resources you've built, that sense that you have like some wiggle room, you want to keep the wiggle room. You don't want to get yourself to the point where it's like how much your load is flush with your capacity. That's the slippery slope. You want to kind of, as much as you'll hit that point from time to time, but you want to try to keep it to where you have a little bit of extra resources, a little bit of wiggle room for yourself. And then that's the right, you're just kind of go from there the rest of the way. And then with that too, if there are like uncontrollable things like relationships, hormonal cycles, other uncontrollable factors in your life that just happen from time to time that you have literally no control over, know that, if you're incrementally training, that would be a time where that's taking up some of the extra space, so you can drop off your incremental training at that time, because that's your load right there. And that can be really helpful, because then you're not overstimulating your brain. So just know that for reference, because that's a relief to realize you don't have to incrementally train when your body or your life is giving you extra load that you can't avoid. Because you just want to, and then if you don't have that and you're just training on calm, and those times are just gonna be more challenging. So just and a big thing with this is just keep being persistent, because you're building calm for the first time, and sometimes when we start training, life like being alive isn't really in your brain's training zone, and that's okay. You can build your way there. So even if your baseline is like nothing and life just feels overwhelming all the time, you can still build that baseline of calm. Just be persistent. Don't give in to despair. Keep picking yourself up and coming back to the present moment, because it is absolutely doable. As much as it may feel impossible, it is not. I think that's it. That's just kind of the basics of how to train on calm. So hopefully that is more informational. I've made a couple videos about it, but not really a specific how-to. So I hope that helps y'all who are training on calm, because that's the first course of action for a lot of us, to really build that foundation for the rest of our recovery. So all the best to you, my friends, and I will talk to you soon.